Vesper.
Hi. I think just to start up, we're talking a lot about our activism based in the United States, and something that I want to say is that there's many different fundamental ideas that encompass the larger idea of movements that are counteracting what we could refer to as this mental health industrial complex. Um, and I can say for myself in my work, we often concentrate on different components of disability justice and thinking of disability justice in the means of how our society is inaccessible to our minds and bodies as we are, and that there isn't anything, again, inherently wrong with us, but rather that our society is inaccessible to how we are. And the reason why that's so important is that both access and identity freedom go hand in hand when we talk about the liberation of people who experience emotional distress and have been inside of the psychiatric system. It is so important to talk about how our minds are incarcerated in our larger society. And I think, something that's really important is that our society as it is now is not something that our bodies and minds were always intended to live in. When we think about indigenous societies that have not been reached by things such as colonization, a lot of those indigenous societies, you see that people don't require things such as psychiatric medication for their emotional distress. There's a lot of families, but particularly mothers and other parents, guiding each other, communities guiding each other and supporting each other through emotional distress as a means of awakening, as self-revelation, and talking more and more. Experiences like hearing voices and experiencing visions and other things like that, they're not inherently pathologized in the context of society, and talking more about that. So when I think about my work, it is deeply rooted in decolonization, re-indigenizing our society. It is rooted in the context of thinking about a social model of disability, trauma, mad identities, and the liberation around mad identities. A lot of people may think, oh, well, with mad identities, is that another way of othering? In a lot of contexts, I think in our society, for compassion and an approach of where someone's like, oh, okay, well, that makes sense, or we should really care about our people, or thinking about discrimination on the basis of identity when we talk about trans and queer communities and BIPOC communities and other communities, where very much talking about our identity is at the center of that. Why isn't our behavior and our emotional distress that is an inherent part of our society and generations of our lives and who we are in a lot of contexts, not really viewed as a form of identity freedom as well? So I do a lot of identity freedom in my work that goes hand in hand with the means of access.
Thank you, Vesper. Thank you. And for me, I want to say the work that I do, it's been a series of unfortunate incidents that brings me here today. But the fact that I'm here today and I wouldn't trade anything for my journey, I look at it as if, something has guided my journey other than myself. And so I get to be grateful in this moment. And so I come to look at, looking at this, as a soul's journey. A lot of unfortunate things happened to me, but I had to, and I heard someone said earlier, find meaning. I had to find meaning in the suffering, and that's kind of what I've been focused on. I started out doing what is, called the peer support work after working at a behavioral health clinic. And I got introduced to that behavioral health clinic through, I had made a video about working to live, and they saw where I was on my journey. in the video, it shows just about every mental health support services that's in the community that I was living in at the time. And because that's all I knew for myself personally. On the parallel side of it, I always believed in education. So so I had my children in private school. And so I had the experience of, you know, them going to country clubs and mansions and estates and swimming pools and all those kind of things, but that was for them. And then on the flip side, when they were gone, you know, into that environment, I was headed over to the mental health center for therapy. And but the thing about it, I got to the point where I had just given up on just, you know, like, this is it. This is what it's going to be like, this mental illness life. And you know, just myself and my youngest son with the television, you just doing that kind of life situation. And people stepped into my life that supported me, that saw the possibilities that I had for my children, because they were parents at the school, at the private school where my children was going to, and they stepped into my life and supported me. Asked me what I want, what I needed. You know, I always dreamt of making movies, and only because I grew up in Jamaica, where I didn't have televisions growing up. I lived outdoors, laying on my back, looking up at the sky for hours, falling asleep, catching butterflies, walking bare feet, looking at plants and looking at all the designs on it. And so, you know, but coming to America, I lost all of that. And then I experienced a lot of pain and suffering and abuse, abandonment, physical, emotional, sexual, bullying, poor education, and all those things. So when I'm 23 years old and, you know, my kid is in private school and I want that good life too, I went and reached out for help, and I was told I was an illness. And you know, so then 20 years later, you know, when people stepped back in my life and supported me, I just realized I could, what I have inside of me is what I could do it. I could do it, and I got to be able to do it with that support. So the people at the behavioral health clinic saw this video that I made and just really advertising everything that they they were doing and saying that this is what's helping me and this is my life, and gave me a job. But the thing is that I got a job at a behavioral clinic that I was not affiliated with going to, and they treated me so unkind, and they couldn't see me. They wouldn't support the people that they have as clients in their community. They wouldn't let the people talk with me. And so I figure out a way to talk to the people. And but most of the time I spend a lot of time just in the office by myself, watching a lot of Gabor Mate and Eckhart Tolle and you know, and all these people that Oprah showed on her live class and Super Soul Sunday. And I was getting, you know, it was just validating what I know for sure for myself. And Tony Robbins, I mean, it was just so many people that was doing work in our society to show how people could move forward with their lives. And so so by time I started working in the peer support, and backtrack to that, one of the thing about being in the mental health community and being compliant. Being compliant is what I would say I was, because when they needed someone, many times they need someone to showcase that this person is a good mental patient, like I say, they would pick me or have me do a speech and just being thankful for them and stuff like that. And you know, but when I started working at the behavioral health clinic and was behind the scene and saw that these people have just as much issues as I had, but I was learning to work through them, and they didn't have to because of their titles. They didn't have to work through it. And I'm like, what? You know, and so an issue that I always had was, you know, this is not fair kind of a thing, but they didn't have to work through it, but I was working through it and able to do that with my life. So by the time I started working in the peer support recovery community, I stopped being a person that somebody could just call on to talk whenever they want somebody to talk, to promote whenever they was promoting. So I came in with a bit of awareness, and I want to say that wasn't such a good thing for me, because I often got excluded because when they ask, could you go speak about your recovery? I'm like, that's not my issue. I'm not recovering from mental illness. I don't believe those labels. That's not for me. That's not my life. I remember one person said to me, so I said, maybe recovering from using psychiatry, services. And the person said to me, well, what's the difference? And I was like, oh, there's a big difference. There's a very big difference. And so, I've always been an observer. And what I observe is that, I remember seeing a woman, 20 something years, and she had when she died, with so many issues that she had, her mother bought a book like this big of certificates of services that she had earned doing all of these different classes, different trainings and everything. So there's a lot of money in this peer recovery movement, and people, peer recovery business. I shouldn't say movement, peer recovery business. There's a lot of money in it, and this woman, that's what her thing looked like. But yet she died of of all of this pain and suffering. Other things I've seen is a young person come in and into the doing the work, the peer recovery work, and is excited and happy and ready to learn and create. And then when he was ready to have support, having a hard time and asked for help, he just wasn't given that help, and he killed himself. And and I just see how that thing is blamed. That's blame on the person, and not the environment, and not what's happening to him. I'm fortunate to work at a company called Advocacy Unlimited, where I'm able to develop a program called a peer forum, where I'm able to ask people to come in and share their work, what they're doing, and stuff like that for change. And they've asked me, you need this to be more diverse. You have to bring some Black people out. That's what they mean when they say diverse. You got to bring some Black people up in here. And but the thing is that I say to myself, I'm not going to bring anyone that's promoting mental illness disorder into this program. There's a lot of other programs at the agency. There are a lot of other opportunities that you could bring somebody in, but I'm not going to bring anyone, and that's going to promote that. And so when I say that, to say another thing that I see, I see a lot of people saying Black mental health. And what they're doing is they're just using the same program and just putting Black faces on these brochures. But it's the same thing, promoting the same disorders, and not having, for me, I had to look at what happened to me. I had to look at the racism. I had to look at the slavery. I had to look at all of the things that contributed to me wanting a white picket fence and Mercedes-Benz, and not being able to achieve that for myself, for my children while they were young. And I'm gonna end this and then send it back to Vesper. But I said, at this point of my journey, my car died the other day, and I was like, I'm gonna get a refund from the insurance company. I'm like, I could use this as a down payment and pay for Mercedes-Benz now and make the payment. So I said to myself, why do I want that, and why would I need that? And then I remember the story behind that is that I'm 25 years old and I'm suffering, and the shopkeeper in our community says to me, you'll never own a Mercedes-Benz. And so the pain inside from that little kid was hold on to that. And I'm like, so I could get one now, just so, okay, so I don't want to die and not have a Mercedes-Benz. And I was like, what do you need that for? So that's the part right there of being able to, that's a description of the soul's journey, to get to a place where I don't have to get a material thing to prove to anybody my worth. And so I have to know my worth. And how did I lose my worth? How did I lose my confidence of being in this world? those are the things that the questions I ask myself. Those are what I get to know. And and the thing is, like, and even to blame people who's practicing racism, I would rather forgive them 77 times 7 times for their behavior towards me than call them mentally ill. Because if I keep forgiving them each moment that they meet me, it's a new moment. It's a new moment to be with me. And as their awareness arise, we could have a good moment together and move forward. You know, in life, what Paul was talking about earlier, you know, that compassion. So, Vesper, thank you for letting me share.
No, of course. And I really appreciated what you had to say, particularly around Black mental health. I find like BIPOC mental health at large, like that's normally the approach, but that, you know, I also find that we're not often talking about how mental health and the context in which it exists in our society is a euphemism for social control.
Yes.
It is used in that context, it exists in that context, and we don't do enough work around it. I also appreciated what you had to say about the peer recovery business, because the industrialization of peer support, a natural thing that we do with each other, which I very much had a lot of my beginnings in that, and that has a lot to say because of the capitalist society that we live in, that we're often, you know, experiencing social justice movements, or rather in this context, this social justice movement within a mental health industrial complex, nonprofit industrial complex, peer recovery business, right? And I think something that's really important about that really parallels when we talk about diagnosis is also the fact that there's a lot of pathology in language. I hear a lot of people say that aside from mental illness, they still say mental health struggle, mental health condition, mental health, you know, and a lot of these regards. And I mean, yes, people can identify with their experience around what is largely labeled and thought of as mental health in whatever regards they may, right? But I think something that is important, you know, particularly from anyone who's working largely with these communities, is the fact that we need to talk about language, right? And one means that is inclusive when we're referring to the entire general populace, but also leave room for reclamation of terms as well, right? Like reclamation of MAD, reclamation of survivorship, and being a psychiatric survivor. I don't think it's something that we outwardly talk about enough. You know, I think it was mentioned earlier that the United Nations recognizes psychiatric abuse, but yet here in the United States, it's often overlooked, and I'm sure in many other countries it is as well. I find that my activism work is really centered around building alternatives and exposing that abuse. It is centered around an anti-oppression framework, and that anti-oppression framework encompasses a few things. First, education and awareness. So often that could be through a peer support context, it could be through another context. It's generally community-led conversations where we're coming into different spaces, carceral spaces like psychiatric institutions or otherwise, and we're talking about alternatives to the psychiatric model, right? Alternatives to what we understand, and ways of kind of diverting away. A good example of this is peer respites. We opened a peer respite earlier this year, and peer respites are psychiatric diversions, if you will, diverting away. If someone's in an emergency room or in another facility experiencing emotional distress, that they can come to a peer respite instead of being in a mental health acute unit or a psychiatric institution of any kind. And this is so important because we're actually avoiding people from having that experience of abuse in the psychiatric system, and instead having them being in a home-like place, right, that is led by psychiatric survivors and MAD people supporting each other. You know, the person's taking their own medications, they're allowed to sit in their presence of emotional distress and self-danger, whether if that's towards themselves or others, and actually have time to process and talk about it without being told. that who they are is problematic to our society, right? And also considering the many contexts of, okay, well, um, that that often there are a lot of things that are related to these social groups that we belong to in our society that are inherently oppressed and treated differently. We are viewed differently because of it. I'll share a little bit of my own story. Coming into peer support, it took a while before I actually was introduced to that alternative. And I think it was so crucial when I was, because I was able to learn more about myself and a lot of other things. But I spent many years of my life in psychiatric institutions, and an important piece of that was that I was diagnosed with schizophrenia. And I later found out that there are a multitude of studies that talk about BIPOC people, mostly Black and African American folks in the United States, that are diagnosed with some type of schizophrenia, whether it be schizophrenia, schizotypal, schizoaffective, often because of the perception of violence, racialized violence, right? Because we are of another race. And what role does that play when the diagnoses that are often being given to folks or enforced upon folks is by psychiatry, which is largely led by white cis men, right? This manual that is built, this framework that is built, these ideas, and how much of our emotional distress is natural, and can we talk through, and how much of it can be a spiritual experience. My work at the Kiva centers, and Kiva means to go within yourself and come out healing yourself, has been really important to that, because of the fact that it really speaks to, okay, you can sit in your distress, you can feel that, we can experience that together. And our peer respite, Karaya peer respite, is a Taino word for moons and for moon and self-reflection. And the reason why that's so important as well is because the moon is representative of enlightenment, and actually saying that, okay, maybe your experience of emotional distress could also be an experience of awakening and clarification, and something that maybe you needed in your life too. Not always, but sometimes it can be. So I think something that's important is that when we're talking about anti-oppression work, that we're building present alternatives. We have education in place. We are actively dismantling the oppressive systems that exist. And I don't think that that's only organizing and community and protesting, but that's also challenging psychiatric institutional licensure boards. That's also sitting at hearings for different policies that impact, psychiatric survivors and mad folks alike, and neurodivergent folks and disabled folks. That is being in the community and doing the work, but then also finding ways to very much organize independently of institutional funding as well.
The agency that I work for do that kind of work also, because there's many components in the agency. We have a community bridger program, we have the healing arts program called Toivo, and we do all that part. But like for my part specifically, just coming into the work, as I mentioned earlier, coming from a background where I was being used to promote different things, I just came to the part where I saw that I can't fight this system. It's a massive thing. It's a really massive thing. I saw a psychiatrist the other day say his family was mentally ill, and he had mild mental illness. I'm like, what is that? And then he talked about the people with severe mental illness. And then they use lived experience. This is something that they're using now to continue. They're fighting hard. They know that change is happening, and they're fighting hard to keep those diagnoses going. And they're using lived experience to do it, because now they're lived experience with psychology background. So now when they go for the funding, they're getting the funding because they know, because you know, they have the titles and they have this lived experience. So then they're getting the funding and they're keeping these diagnosis disorders going. And so that's the next level step that I see happening now. And so I just focusing on, you know, like I said, I was learning and gathering information, and I've put all of that in a program called compassionate activism, because and to be, and to, you know, to get to a point where it's people that are psychologists, and Joe mentioned earlier, Sammy Tamimi and Joan McCreef, you know, psychiatrists and psychologists, Lucy and Joe, Paula Kaplan, Ram Dass, who was Richard Alpert, who are able to validate my experience that everything, you know, that I'm good in this life. So I know that change could happen, but there's people who is using this lived experience to hold on, you know, to keeping it the same. And so what I've done with the compassionate activism is to gain information from everyone that is doing work. And a lot of people is here at the Disorder for Everyone, and they were here at the last one last year, and get that information to the people in the community to build that strength within. Because once I build my strength within and my confidence, I have something that I could give back. I cannot give to somebody what I don't have if I'm doing peer support work. If I'm doing peer support work and I'm using mental illness for myself, I'm going to tell somebody else that they're mentally ill. And that's all I have, and that's all I knew. And so that's what would keep going on. So building my strength, building that compassion, knowing who I am, knowing my worth, knowing my confidence. When I sit to talk with somebody who's in pain and suffering like I was, or like I could still experience, because I am having this human experience, I have something to give back, you know? So that's because I just, like I said, I just saw that it's a massive business. It's money, there's grants, and people get the grants, and they keep promoting it, you know.
Just wanted a little quick time check of 2 minutes to go, just to, yes, thank you both.
Yeah, Vesper, we're going to wrap it up about
Yeah, I think
Drop the Disorder book.
yes. I think something that's super important as we're talking about this work is the most important thing is that we need to do something about it, right? So there's a new Drop the Disorder book coming out next year, and it's about doing something about it. It is about activism efforts. Myself, Vesper Moore, and Mitzy Sky, we're contributing to this book, and it is edited by Joe Watson, as always. And I think the great thing about this is that often we theorize when we're talking about these things. We're talking about some of these efforts, you know, we can do, but we don't often have, like, what is tangible? Like, what are the tangible next steps to, you know, supporting our people in these psychiatric institutions and in this larger, again, mental health industrial complex?
Yes, thank you. And thank you for having us here. It's really good. I need to connect with you more, Vesper.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I appreciate the platform, again, for talking about, you know, some of the work that we're doing in the United States. I think internationally, we need more platforms to network just like this one. So thank you for having us.